Crimson Tactics Rise of the White Banner, an indie TRPG developed by Black March Studios, released on Steam to quite a bit of controversy. After being in early access for only 1 month, Black March decided to release the game and cut back on the originally promised content, stating that the game would be too big and needed to be broken up into a series. The game as it stands now is supposed to be a 40-hour experience and a complete story, though many reviews claim the story ends abruptly and that the whole game only takes 20 to 25 hours. Am I here to confirm this for you? No, because I didn't make it that far in my playthrough. But why? Why am I doing a review when I haven't completed the game? Well, let's get into that. Here at 89 Games, I play RPGs and tactical RPG/strategy games, and I've covered many of these and played even more since starting the channel almost 2 years ago. Some of these have been amazing experiences that kept me hooked for over 40, 50, even 100 hours, as was the case with Tactics Ogre Reborn. These games get reviews, tips videos, and sometimes even discussion videos, while the games that I never complete typically get nothing. So why does Crimson Tactics get a review? Because it was almost good, and it can be a cautionary tale for other developers. It's a game that I want to finish. I do have some interest in the story and what builds I could make with my units, but the issues of the game in its current state make finishing the game more chore than fun. Before we jump into the nitty-gritty though, let's just get a brief overview of Crimson Tactics. If you've played any other TRPG, especially Tactics Ogre Reborn or Final Fantasy Tactics, then you know what this game is. You'll command soldiers, archers, mages, and other classes as you work your way through the world, uncovering evil plots, making new friends and enemies, and making choices that affect the world. Everything you would expect from battles is here, with attacking from the side or back of an enemy doing more damage, and giving you a better hit chance, along with terrain, elemental affinities, and even weather also affecting hit chance and damage. Each character has a weight stat that affects how often they get a turn in the turn order, and that stat is affected by equipped items, buffs, and debuffs. Characters' classes can be changed at will if you have the class marks, just like in Tactics Ogre, but characters will keep all skills learned in the previous class, allowing for unique and interesting builds. In fact, the game design is essentially Tactics Ogre Reborn with a different skin and a less interesting plot. One interesting addition though is the ability to buy and use mounts, though in practice it isn't as exciting as it sounds. Overall though, the basic game sounds good, and it is, as it follows a very successful formula, but it follows the formula too closely, I think. When your game fails to stand out in any meaningful way, players will realize that they'd rather just play the game yours got its inspiration from. A unique story, art style, or music can go a long way at separating a game from its competition, but Crimson Tactics falls short in all of these. The story is a very generic TRPG story, though some of the inter-character relationships make up for this genericness, like the growing friendship between the main character and the blacksmith-turned-soldier Blas. The music is also very generic fantasy RPG and limited, and the art, though it doesn't look bad at all, in fact, I think the game looks really good, it still manages to be generic somehow. Now, I know this is an indie game with an indie game budget, and with such games, I can generally forgive a limited soundtrack, lower art or graphics quality, and even somewhat generic stories, but only if the core gameplay loop is strong and or does something new or different. Otherwise, you need to have unique music, art, and or story to keep me invested. Crimson Tactics is overall an okay game, but you'd be better off just playing its inspiration, Tactics Ogre Reborn or Final Fantasy Tactics. I think the simplest way to put how I feel about Crimson Tactics would be this. You know when you really want a nutty bar, but all you can find in the vending machine is buddy bars instead? Yeah, I mean, it's good-ish, but it isn't really what you wanted, and later that day when you get off work, you're gonna go to the store and buy nutty bars because that's what you want. So, with that said, let's dig into the flaws of this complete game, and then we'll give credit to where credit is due by calling out the things the game does do well. But if you want to know why I ended my playthrough, stick around to the end. When talking about flaws in the game, aside from the generic game design already mentioned, you'll notice that most of these are minor issues that alone wouldn't be that big of a deal, but together become a major nuisance and make the game a chore, as I mentioned earlier in the video. First on my list, and not in any particular order, you can choose to have a character defend, and of course enemies can do this too, but there is no indicator to show a unit is defending. This is important because when a unit is defending, the first attack on them will automatically be blocked no matter what. This means that without a way to show this, you'll have to remember which enemy is defending so you don't waste an attack on them. This can be very frustrating because if I know for sure an enemy is defending, I could target them with magic which can't be blocked by a shield, or I could just focus my attacks elsewhere until the next turn. This is an easy fix too. There is already an animation that plays when defending. Just have the unit hold the last frame of that animation with their shield out. Now I know they are defending. The next issue is how facing works. As is typical with most TRPGs, you can select a unit's facing at the end of their turn. However, in this game, when using the mouse and keyboard, the direction selection is tied to the tile your cursor is hovering over, not the location of the cursor in relation to the unit. This means that if your cursor is off the map or for some other reason not over a tile, your unit facing won't change. This occasionally can result in not getting your unit to face the way you want it to. Now again, this is not that big of a deal, but it's just one small hole in the fabric that is Crimson Tactics. Something that I think is a much bigger deal and one of the biggest chore aspects of the game is how the action menu works. TRPGs typically have a menu pop up right on the character with all their possible actions, which feels intuitive and natural, but the action menu for Crimson Tactics is locked to the top left corner of the screen. This feels janky and out of place as you have to look away from your character to select their action, then look back to them to select where to move or attack. With a mouse or a controller, this becomes very annoying. The best way to use the menu is with the shortcut keys, but even this becomes annoying as you have to manually back out of each menu if you want to, for instance, check the damage of different attacks on an enemy with the attack preview. And then the shortcut keys don't stay consistent either. If you open up the inventory to use an item, depending on which items you have, the revive potion, for instance, might be on the 3 key or it might be on the 5 key. I don't understand why the developers went with this control interface. It feels like a placeholder interface you'd use in testing, and if they are copying so much from Tactics Ogre, why not use the same action menu system? This is one of the many issues that makes this game feel incomplete, as so many have said. Personally, I don't really care for most of the drama around the game being shortened to make room for a sequel. I think the developers probably had a good reason for it, but totally screwed up on the communication side, making it sound like a quick money grab. What I do take issue with is releasing this game in its current form from early access before it was ready. There are issues in the game that another few months of early access probably could have hammered out, but instead they decided to do a full release with those issues unfixed. This is supposed to be a full, complete game with as few bugs as possible. So why did they release it in this form? Why? They've even stated that they will not do any more work on Crimson Tactics aside from small quality of life updates, which could mean some of the issues I'm bringing up get fixed, which would be good, but they should have been ironed out in early access. In fact, if this game was still in early access, I could forgive all of this, but it's not. And one glaring fault that shows the incomplete nature of the game is that the block chance listed in the attack preview in battle doesn't show as a percent, but has the stats value instead. But if you look on the tutorial page on this subject, you'll see a percentage there. I mean, come on. Besides this, the game still contains game-breaking bugs too, which we'll get to in just a bit. But moving on from my little rant, the next frustrating little issue is with foreground object transparency when your units are behind things like trees. The trees will go transparent so you can see your units, but only if you have the camera in a very specific spot. The object transparency trigger is bound to the camera. Now, I'm no programming expert, and I don't know if this is how it's usually done, or if this trigger is normally tied to something else, but regardless, the window for it is very small. This can make placing and moving your units frustrating as the trees keep fading in and out and blocking your line of sight. Again, another issue that players would bring up and could be fixed in an early access period longer than a month. My next point has to do with mounts. Now, the idea of getting mounts and changing the way my character plays by putting them on a mount was an intriguing one, but it's poorly executed. Adding a mount should give me more movement, right? So I can charge behind enemies and flank them, or assault the backline of archers and mages. No, the mount does not give you more movement. In fact, it makes you slower, so your turn comes around less often, but gives you essentially a second health pool. When that pool is depleted, the mount is gone, and now your soldier is on foot again with his own health pool. So what we get from mounts essentially is a sponge tank. That's it. And this mount also takes up a deployment slot, meaning you actually field less soldiers when using a mount. Now, some mounts do get special abilities, as we see in the prologue when we get to use a dragon, but the main thing I want from a mount is mobility, so I can flank enemies. But I don't get that, and starting mounts don't have special abilities anyway. The issues with mounts don't stop there though. The movement for them is janky, as they take up 4 squares on the map instead of 1. Now, this part makes sense. A large animal isn't necessarily going to fit everywhere a human could, but because of this 4 square size, the movement doesn't always work as it should. For instance, if you just want to move 1 square or turn around, the grid won't always snap to where you want to go, meaning sometimes you just can't attack someone because the game won't snap to the spot you want, but it will snap to one on the other side of your character. Finally, my last issue with mounts is how the game will just say, nope. On one mission, my horse was inexplicably taken away from me. I thought, maybe I messed something up. So I reloaded my save and I tried again. Nope. So after playing the mission, I think I realized why this happened. Because plot. At the end of the mission, the boss character jumps on a horse to escape. I think the idea here was, if a player has a horse, the boss escaping on one makes no sense. So let's take their horse away for the mission if they have one. But out of nowhere, your friend has one and takes off in pursuit. What? Seriously? The game does this in other places too, where an enemy that is supposed to escape will become invulnerable with plot armor until they can walk off the screen. Just end the mission and use a cutscene for this. Don't make me play 2 more rounds just to watch him walk off the screen. Now granted, some of these missions then have you finish off all the other enemies, but again, just use a cutscene, take the boss character away, and then continue the battle. This is just another issue where a little bit of polish would have gone a long way. Now, I promise I have some good things to say, but there is one more stop on this issue train. The story in Crimson Tactics isn't bad. I know I said it was generic, because it is, but that doesn't mean it's bad. As I mentioned before, the inter-character relationships are a bit of a redeeming quality that add a little flavor to an otherwise typical Civil War, bad noble guy, evil empire, macro story. However, the choice of dialogue, style, I guess, is strange. They tried to go with a Tactics Ogre Old English style of sentence structure, but they totally butchered it, and it goes from Yoda speak to what? They got it wrong, and dialogue can be hard to follow at times. Honestly, just normal English would have been just fine. So there are more of these minor issues I could mention, but it's time to talk about some positives. Does the game have redeeming qualities? Yes, a few. First, one of the highlights of this game is its enemy AI. Archers and mages will kite you, rogues will run behind your units and flank you, and warriors and knights will tie you up, making it harder to flank and to get to the archers and mages. I played on normal difficulty and the game gave a fair challenge and the AI felt more competent than usual. By the way, I should mention quickly that there is an adaptable difficulty setting where the game will change difficulty on you based on your performance if you want, or you can turn this off so the difficulty stays on your initial selection. In my case, I had this off for consistent difficulty. Another cool gameplay feature though, is that enemies will flee the battle as their loyalty drops. The more of their allies fall, the more likely an enemy is to just quit and run away. I always appreciate this kind of mechanic in a game as it adds some realism. I mean, if I'm the last mercenary or bandit on the field, I'm gonna run too. I'm already not getting paid since the job got botched, might as well get away with my life, right? You can also recruit these enemies though that have low loyalty by using the recruit option when adjacent to them. Similar to Tactics Ogre Reborn, the lower the enemy's health, the easier they will be to recruit. The bad thing is that there isn't much benefit to this early on at least, as many of the units you could recruit can also just be hired in town for a bit of money. The next bright spot though is the class changing system. It is very much like Tactics Ogre, but you can have more skills equipped which provide for much more build variety. You use class marks to change to a new class and you keep all the skills unlocked from your previous class. Then as you gain more skill points in your new class, you can use them to learn all the skills unlocked at your current level. Honestly, this is probably the most interesting part of the gameplay, and one I would like to explore more as the build possibilities are very intriguing, but this alone isn't enough to overcome the other issues in the game. Finally, as I mentioned earlier, the basic mechanics are good, with damage done and evasion and block chance being affected by things like attack direction, height difference, elemental affinities, and even weather. The basic foundation of the game is solid. Playing it isn't a bad experience, but it isn't a great one. You can play almost any other decent tactics game and scratch the same itch. So with all this said, I was still on the fence about playing all the way through the game. I wasn't having a bad time, but I was getting frustrated with some of the little issues that kept popping up. What finally broke the camel's back though, and made me decide to move on, was what I consider a game-breaking bug. A game-breaking bug for me is anything that hinders progress in the game or forces me to lose significant time in a game. This occurred on the first mission of the third arc of the game when fighting some undead creatures. At first, I saw the undead creatures and I thought, oh, okay, we're gonna get a little interesting here. Maybe there's a little more to this game. But then, as I was almost done with the mission, an undead tried to do its resurrect thing that undead tend to do in these games, and the game locked up. I could not move any characters, attack, or do anything except open the main menu. So I restarted the mission from the menu and tried again. And again, I almost got to victory, and then a seemingly different bug caused a freeze up. This time, from what I could tell, a silenced enemy tried to cast a spell, and the game proceeded to lock up again, with the only thing available being the menu. After this, I quit. I did something else for a while, but then I thought, no, I'll give Crimson Tactics one more chance. So I played the mission again, and this time I got through. The mission was complete, and I could move on, but I didn't want to anymore. The little issues had worn me down, and now this major bug issue had pushed me over the edge. I was done. Ultimately, Crimson Tactics Rise of the White Banner is a game. It relies too heavily on the game design and mechanics of its much better cousins to the point that it isn't unique enough to stand on its own. That alone doesn't make it a bad game, or even one that I would not play, but add to that the unpolished nature of the game and a game-breaking bug or two, and now you've just lost me. Given time, maybe this becomes a good game, as there is a good foundation, but from the sound of it, the developer is done doing any major updates to the game, which is a shame because they were onto something. If they do produce a sequel, maybe it will be a great game. But only time will tell. For now, check out this video of a much better game. Thank you for watching, and keep on gaming.